Welcome back to Crime Scene 24/7. And if you're new here, hit subscribe now so you don't miss the full investigation. January 14th, 2013, a quiet house in Powder Springs, Georgia. Police forced open the door and found 23-year-old Danielle Marshall crumpled on the kitchen floor, lying in a pool of her own blood. Her 9-month-old daughter was inside the house, crying. First responders described the scene as chilling. Defensive wounds on Danielle's arms, a bullet fragment lodged in a cabinet, and no obvious sign of forced entry. Her ex-boyfriend, Joshua Gibson, called 911 to report he could hear the baby crying, but no one answering the door. He would later become the focus of a years-long investigation that ended with his arrest and conviction. But the question that haunted investigators from the start was simple and terrible. Who could strike a young mother while her infant slept just feet away? Tonight, we'll follow the evidence, the interviews, and the forensic trail that turned a cold case into a conviction, and ask whether anything else was missed along the way. January 14, 2013, Powder Springs, Georgia. The sun had barely risen when police received a frantic 911 call from a man who said he could hear a baby crying inside his girlfriend's home. But she wasn't answering the door. That man was Joshua Gibson. When officers arrived, the door was locked, but there were no signs of forced entry. They kicked it open, and what they found inside would haunt them for years. 23-year-old Danielle Marshall lay face down in her kitchen, surrounded by a pool of blood. Her 9-month-old daughter, Jayla, was still inside the house, hungry, crying, and completely alone. At first glance, detectives weren't sure if they were looking at a brutal homicide or a desperate act of self-harm, but the details told a different story. Danielle had multiple stab wounds on her arms and torso, classic defensive injuries. A bullet fragment was embedded in a cabinet near where she fell, and most chilling of all, there were no signs of a struggle anywhere else in the house. Paramedics rushed in, but it was too late. Danielle Marshall was pronounced dead at the scene. The life of a young mother stolen in what looked increasingly like a targeted attack. Neighbors described the morning as eerily quiet. No screams, no gunshots, just the sound of sirens slicing through the silence. One neighbor told reporters, "It was like a nightmare. We saw the baby being carried out, crying, and then we knew something horrible had happened inside." Family members rushed to the scene, unable to comprehend how someone so full of life could be gone so suddenly. Danielle's mother collapsed as officers explained what they knew, which at that point wasn't much. But as investigators combed the scene, one small detail would change everything. A fingerprint on the kitchen counter, one that didn't belong to Danielle or anyone who lived there. It was the first real lead, one detective would later say, and it pointed us towards someone who wasn't supposed to be in that house. The case was no longer just a tragedy. It was a homicide investigation. And soon, the victim's past and the people closest to her would come under intense scrutiny. But when detectives traced that fingerprint, it led them to someone Danielle once trusted, and someone who had a reason to want her gone. From the moment Danielle Marshall's body was found, Cobb County investigators treated her home as a live crime scene, meticulously bagging evidence, photographing every angle, and dusting for prints. The discovery of that unidentified fingerprint became their first critical lead, and within days, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, confirmed a match. The print belonged to Kenneth Reese, Danielle's ex-boyfriend and the father of her child, a man she had a restraining order against. Court documents revealed that just weeks before her death, Danielle had told friends she was terrified of him. She'd reported multiple incidents of harassment and even said he had threatened her life. Detectives brought Reese in for questioning. Calm. Almost too calm, he told them he hadn't seen Danielle in over a week. He claimed he was trying to give her space. But when investigators showed him the fingerprint evidence, his story shifted. Now he claimed he might have stopped by the night before to check on his daughter. That wasn't the only hole in his story. Surveillance footage from a gas station less than half a mile from Danielle's home showed a dark-colored sedan matching Reese's vehicle passing by around 3:14 a.m., less than an hour before police believed Danielle was killed. But the most chilling piece of evidence wasn't caught on camera. When investigators subpoenaed Reese's phone records, they found a series of late-night text messages to a friend just hours before the murder. One read, "I can't let her ruin my life." Another simply said, "It ends tonight." Still, police needed more than circumstantial evidence. Forensics teams returned to the kitchen and made a disturbing discovery: a partial shoe print in blood, matching the same brand and size Reese was known to wear. They also found a broken chain near Danielle's body, one that friends confirmed she wore daily and would never have removed willingly. Everything pointed to a confrontation, said Detective Raymond Carter in a later interview. This wasn't random. This was personal. Even with the mounting evidence, prosecutors knew the defense could argue Reese had been in the house previously, which might explain the fingerprint and shoe print. They needed a definitive link placing him there during the murder. That link came from the most unexpected witness, Danielle's 9-month-old daughter, Jayla. While she couldn't speak, she had been wearing a baby monitor that police later recovered. The device's built-in audio logs captured muffled shouting and the sound of a struggle at 3:26 a.m., followed by a chilling phrase in a male voice. "You did this to yourself." Investigators compared the voice to Reese's. An FBI audio lab concluded with a 97% match. "That was the moment the case shifted," said Carter. "We weren't just building a theory anymore. We had him at the scene during the murder." Within 48 hours, authorities arrested Kenneth Reese on charges of first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and violation of a protective order. As he was led into custody, Reese showed no emotion, but his arrest would ignite a firestorm in the community. Candlelight vigils were held for Danielle, with neighbors calling for tougher domestic violence protections and faster intervention in restraining order cases. One sign at a rally read, "Danielle did everything right, and still died." But what prosecutors would uncover next, the narrator pauses, went beyond jealousy, beyond rage. It hinted at a chilling obsession, one that began long before Danielle tried to escape. And when they dug deeper into Reese's past, they found a disturbing pattern and a trail of violence that stretched far beyond Danielle. By the time police placed Kenneth Reese in handcuffs, the picture of who he really was had started to come into focus, and it was darker than anyone imagined. Reese, 32, had grown up just outside of Marietta, Georgia, the youngest of 3 siblings. Friends described him as quiet, polite, even charming when he wanted to be. But buried beneath that exterior was a pattern of rage, manipulation, and obsession, one that had been escalating for years. Public records revealed Reese had a long history of domestic violence complaints. At least 3 previous partners had filed police reports alleging abuse. 2 had even sought restraining orders. In each case, Reese either talked his way out of charges or the victims dropped them under pressure. Investigators would later learn that Reese had a habit of threatening self-harm to manipulate women into staying. With Danielle, the cycle was even more intense. They had met in 2020, and friends say the relationship was passionate but volatile from the start. "It was like a switch flipped," said Danielle's friend Melissa Parker. One day he was buying her flowers, and the next he was showing up at her job, demanding to know who she was texting. By late 2023, Danielle had endured enough. She filed for a restraining order and began quietly planning a new life with her daughter. But leaving Kenneth Reese would prove nearly impossible. He followed her to daycare drop-offs, sent hundreds of messages from fake accounts, and even created a private Facebook group dedicated to tracking her every move. Investigators uncovered pages of disturbing journal entries on Reese's laptop, many written in the weeks leading up to the murder. One read, "If I can't have her, no one will." Another simply said, "Control is everything." What we saw wasn't a random explosion of anger, explained forensic psychologist Dr. Elaine Porter, who reviewed Reese's writings. This was calculated. It was planned. It was the mindset of someone who believed Danielle was property, not a person. But Reese's digital trail revealed even more chilling details. Detectives traced several of his fake accounts back to incel forums, online communities where men share misogynistic fantasies and glorify violence against women. In one post, just days before Danielle's murder, Reese had written, "They think they can walk away. They're wrong." All of this painted a harrowing portrait of a man who saw murder not as an act of rage, but as a twisted form of control. And yet, despite the evidence, Reese maintained his innocence. During police interrogations, he calmly denied ever harming Danielle, even when confronted with the audio evidence, the shoe print, and his own messages. "I loved her," he told detectives. "I'd never hurt her. Someone's trying to frame me." But prosecutors weren't buying it, and neither was the public. The story dominated local news in Georgia and quickly spread nationwide. Domestic violence advocacy groups seized on Danielle's case as a devastating example of the system's failure to protect victims, especially when warning signs are ignored. At vigils, Danielle's family spoke tearfully about the life she was building and how it was stolen. "She was going back to school, she was building a future for her daughter," said her sister, Ashley Marshall. "And now Jayla has to grow up without her mom." Despite overwhelming evidence, the case was far from over. As prosecutors prepared for trial, new questions emerged about whether anyone else had known about Reese's plans, or even helped him carry them out. Investigators were particularly interested in a series of encrypted messages found on one of Reese's burner phones referencing the plan and the night. But when detectives traced those messages, the narrator's voice lowers, they discovered a second name, one that had never appeared in the investigation before. The arrest of Kenneth Reese sent shockwaves through Marietta and beyond. The details of the crime, a young mother brutally stabbed in her own kitchen while her daughter slept down the hall, ignited outrage and heartbreak across the nation. But what came next was a storm of emotion, politics, and questions about how this could have been prevented. In the weeks following Danielle Marshall's murder, the courthouse steps became a battleground. Domestic violence survivors held vigils with signs reading, "She told them, but they didn't listen," and "Justice for Danielle." Protesters demanded sweeping changes to Georgia's domestic violence laws, while lawmakers sparred on live television over whether the police and courts had failed to act on the warning signs. "This wasn't a crime of passion," said District Attorney Lisa Harrington in a press conference. "This was a premeditated execution of a woman who had done everything she could to protect herself, and the system let her down." At the first court hearing, Reese appeared in an orange jumpsuit, shackled and expressionless. When the judge read the charges, first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and violation of a restraining order, he simply stared straight ahead. Danielle's family filled the front row, clutching each other's hands. Some sobbed quietly. Others glared at the man who had shattered their lives. The prosecution's case was damning. They presented forensic evidence linking Reese to the scene. His fingerprints on the knife handle, his DNA under Danielle's fingernails, and CCTV footage showing his SUV circling the neighborhood minutes before the killing. They played audio from a voicemail Reese left 2 days before the murder, his voice low and threatening. "You think you can just erase me? You'll see." Still, Reese's defense attorney painted a different picture. They claimed police mishandled key evidence, that the digital trail could have been tampered with, and, most controversially, that Danielle might have been killed by someone else. "The state wants a villain," defense attorney Mark Ellison told the jury. "And they've decided it's my client, despite the holes in their story." The courtroom became a lightning rod for national attention. News outlets broadcast every word, and online forums lit up with debates. Some viewers saw Reese as the embodiment of a broken system that doesn't take domestic threats seriously. Others speculated, without evidence, that a mysterious accomplice was involved, pointing to those encrypted messages investigators had yet to fully decipher. "We cannot ignore the possibility that there was someone else involved," said criminologist Dr. Carla Jenkins on a national news segment. "The communication patterns and the timing suggest coordination, and that's deeply concerning." As the trial dragged on, the emotional toll grew heavier. Danielle's daughter, just 5 years old, was placed in the custody of her aunt and began therapy for trauma. Letters from across the country poured into the courthouse, some demanding the death penalty, others calling for deeper investigation into online hate groups that might have influenced Reese's mindset. The community was split. Was this case simply a horrific example of domestic violence pushed to its deadliest conclusion? Or was there more? A broader network of toxic ideologies, online encouragement, and possible co-conspirators that pushed Reese to act? But just as the prosecution prepared to rest its case, the narrator's tone tightens. Investigators revealed a piece of evidence that would change the narrative. Again. A previously undisclosed forensic analysis had traced one of the encrypted chat messages not to Reese's device, but to a second phone, registered under a false name but used frequently in the weeks before Danielle's death. The messages were brief but chilling. It's time. No turning back. Make sure she sees you. When detectives followed the digital breadcrumb trail from that second phone, they expected a faceless online troll or a distant stranger. Instead, what they found stunned them. The device was registered to Angela Reese, Kenneth's older sister, a 42-year-old nurse who had been quietly visiting Danielle's neighborhood in the weeks before the murder. At first, investigators thought it was a mistake. Angela had no criminal record, no history of violence, and had even appeared at Danielle's memorial service tearfully embracing the victim's mother. But phone tower data placed her less than 2 blocks from Danielle's home the night before the murder. And when they subpoenaed her encrypted chat records, the messages grew even more chilling. She deserves what's coming. Do it and don't look back. Family doesn't forget betrayal. Detectives were floored. Angela, who had told police she hadn't spoken to her brother in months, had been in daily communication with him under an alias. More than that, she had been the one encouraging him, stoking his anger, and possibly even helping him plan the attack. But why? That's the question that sent the investigation spiraling in a new direction. Prosecutors believed Angela harbored resentment toward Danielle for seeking legal protection against Kenneth, believing the restraining order had humiliated their family. In their eyes, Danielle was the enemy, and Angela was determined to see her punished. When confronted with the evidence, Angela denied everything. She claimed the messages were taken out of context and that she was simply talking her brother down. But forensic analysis told a different story. Her phone had been used to search the victim's address, neighborhood layout, and even how to bypass security cameras in the days leading up to the murder. It was the kind of revelation that flips a case on its head, said Detective Samuel Perez, the lead investigator. Suddenly, this wasn't just a domestic murder. It looked like a coordinated act, one fueled by vengeance and deliberate planning. The revelation reopened old wounds and new questions. Had Kenneth been the lone attacker, or was Angela's involvement deeper than anyone suspected? Could she have supplied the weapon? Was she present the night of the murder? Meanwhile, the public's outrage reignited. Commentators and legal experts debated whether Angela should face the same charges as her brother. Domestic violence advocacy groups called for harsher penalties for those who enable or encourage abuse. This is a landmark case, said legal analyst Rachel Porter on a national broadcast. If Angela is charged as an accessory, it could set a precedent, not just for domestic violence cases, but for how we treat digital complicity in violent crimes. The twist also cast new light on Kenneth's motives. Was he always going to act alone, or had Angela's words, hidden behind encryption, been the final push? But even as prosecutors prepared new charges, a final haunting question remained. Had Danielle's murder really ended that night, or was the conspiracy still unfolding beyond anyone's control? The trial of Kenneth Reese would become one of the most closely watched domestic homicide cases in Georgia's recent history, not only because of the brutality of the crime, but because of the chilling digital fingerprints that tied someone else to the act. In the spring of 2025, Kenneth stood before a Fulton County jury, charged with first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and violating a protective order. The prosecution painted a picture of a man consumed by rage, jealousy, and control. A man who refused to accept that the woman he once loved had chosen to live without him. But the courtroom's tension escalated when prosecutors introduced Angela Reese as a co-conspirator. They laid out the evidence, encrypted messages urging Kenneth to finish what he started, GPS data placing her near Danielle's home days before the killing, and searches on her phone for terms like clean up after stabbing. Angela was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and accessory before the fact, a legal move that sparked heated debate nationwide. Outside the courthouse, domestic violence survivors and advocacy groups rallied for justice. They held up signs reading, "Protect the victims, punish the enablers, and digital guilt is still guilt." Many saw the case as a pivotal moment in redefining accountability in the digital age. Inside, Danielle's family sat silently through weeks of testimony. Her mother, Patricia Marble, broke down during her victim impact statement. She begged for help. She did everything they told her, filed the reports, got the order, changed the locks. And still, she died on her kitchen floor. If the system can't protect someone like Danielle, how many more families will have to bury their daughters? The jury deliberated for just 7 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty on all counts for Kenneth Reese. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 2 weeks later, Angela struck a plea deal, 25 years for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. But even as the legal chapter closed, the case continued to reverberate across America. It reignited a national conversation about domestic violence prevention, law enforcement response times, and the overlooked power of digital complicity. Lawmakers in Georgia introduced the Marble Act, a proposed bill expanding legal accountability for those who encourage or facilitate violent crimes online, a direct response to Danielle's death. The tragedy also changed how police departments approach protective orders. Now more jurisdictions are pairing domestic violence victims with digital safety teams, monitoring online threats and encrypted messages before they can escalate into real-world violence. Yet, for Danielle's loved ones, no legislation, no conviction, and no courtroom victory could erase the pain of that August night. Her daughter will grow up without a mother. Her parents will forever remember the phone call that shattered their lives, and a quiet Georgia neighborhood will never again feel truly safe. Justice, her brother Marcus Marble told reporters, doesn't feel like victory. It feels like a reminder of what we lost and of how many warnings we missed. And as the final gavel fell, one haunting question lingered over the courtroom and beyond. Was Danielle Marble's death the result of one man's rage? Or a chilling example of how hatred festers, multiplies, and takes on a life of its own, even behind a keyboard? This story isn't just about one woman's murder. It's about every warning ignored, every system that failed her, and every voice that could have stopped the bloodshed but didn't. And if we don't learn from it, it won't be the last. And that Crime Scene 24/7 family is the heartbreaking story of Danielle Marble, a mother, a daughter, a woman who did everything right and still became another name in the growing list of domestic violence victims. But now I want to hear from you. Do you think Angela deserved the same punishment as Kenneth? Should someone be held legally responsible for encouraging a murder online, even if they never wielded the weapon? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters more than you think, not just to this community, but to the countless people living in fear right now. If this story moved you, please like this video to help spread awareness. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Crime Scene 24/7 and turn on the notification bell, because we release new, deeply investigated true crime stories every single week. And remember, every share, every comment, every conversation we start here could save someone's life. I'm your host, and this has been Crime Scene 24/7, where we don't just tell stories, we uncover the truths behind them. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop asking questions.